Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk Family Life, building shatterproof families one brick at a time. We pray that godly wisdom and holistic health principles will be shared this evening, and that at least one person will have obtained some wisdom nuggets to guide your stewardship as it relates to your holistic health, mind, body, relationship. And of course, we're temples of Christ. So we hope that these wisdom nuggets will help you this evening, not just for our benefit, but for God's glory and for his kingdom. Amen. We want to acknowledge ministers joining us tonight, everyone watching online via Facebook or YouTube, everyone on Zoom. We invite you to share the link so that as many people as possible can share in the discussion this evening and learn more about holistic health. We'd also like to encourage your participation through the chat. Use the emojis, comment, express concerns, ask questions so that our panelists can address as many of them as possible. So when we last met, we had a discussion on physical health. Before that, we had a discussion on mental health. Tonight, we want to look at the complementary relationship between mental and physical health, the mind-body relationship. And we want to take your questions about mental health, physical health, or both. To recap, we learned the WHO, the World Health Organization, definition of health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. We learned that mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, how we feel, how we act. It helps to determine how we handle stress, how we relate to others, and how we make choices. We also learned from mentalhealth.gov that mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood to adolescence and throughout adulthood. The Wellness School Project suggested to us that physical health represents one dimension of total well-being. It refers to the state of your physical body and how well it's operating. So tonight, we have three panelists with us, Seneca King, Antonio Cheltenham, and Dr. Natalie Roberts, who will share with us on the mind-body relationship. And so we want to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves before we advance the discussion this evening and perhaps make an opening statement about the topic. We're going to start with you, Ms. King.
Sure. Hi, I'm Seneca, and I'm an educator, and currently I'm also a student. And I'm going to talk a little bit about social relationships and the tie-in with mental well-being and overall health, a state of well-being. And I'm sure Dr. Roberts will talk about the physical interplay between social and mental health and the physical health.
Fantastic. So Dr. Roberts, she called your name, so we'll come to you next. Unmute your mic.
All right, so I'm Dr. Natalie Roberts. I have been a doctor for the last 21 years. I specialized in sports and exercise medicine, and my particular interest in that forte is nutrition. For the last 13 years, I've been back in Barbados and have a private practice where I do both family medicine and sports medicine, and work in a multidisciplinary practice really to help my patients. What I would say is that I found the longer that I practice, the more important balance is, whether that be the balance between medical practice as well as the mind-body relationship. And so I'm a great advocate in terms of making sure that mental health as well as physical health is maintained for all of my patients.
And finally, we have Antonio Cheltenham.
Hi, good evening, everyone. As they were stated, my name is Antonio Cheltenham. I am a fitness instructor slash strength and conditioning coach. I would say that this has been 10 years now that I received my degree from Venezuela in physical activity and health. So I would be looking and helping guide persons today in the physical aspect, and also some parts of the mental aspect, and how it ties in, and how we as a community can help move ourselves forward and help to have a better physical and health and mental health connection for ourselves.
Fantastic. So tonight is about Q&A. So again, we invite you to post your questions in the chat. We really want to address things that you're concerned about. We want to demystify some of the things we would have heard that may not necessarily be true. Seneca, I want to come back to you and ask if you could share with us some of the lessons you've learned over the years in your field.
On mental health and
Yes.
social well-being. Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, I want to give us a working definition for social health. Social health is defined by various researchers as our ability to interact and form meaningful relationships with others. So whether those relationships are in the home, at work, in the church, we are social beings. Wherever we go, we are interacting not with ourselves, but with others. So the ability to get along and form meaningful relationships, and also the ability to adapt to our changing world, because from day to day, no one environment is the same. You go to your workplace in the morning, you're not guaranteed that your day is going to run smoothly. You're going to meet hurdles of various kinds. In the home, same thing. We don't wake up on the right side of the bed every day. And, we have to interact with our family members and so forth. So our environment, our interactions are dynamic. They're always changing. They're not static. You can't guarantee that a day will go the way you expect it to go. So the ability to adapt is also a part of being, of maintaining good social health and good mental health as well. So signs of being socially healthy include things such as having assertive skills rather than being passive or aggressive. Social well-being also has to do with, or social health also has to do with balancing your time, social and personal time, being engaged with people in the community, being yourself, your true self in every situation. So you have to learn how to maintain your cool, if that's how you train yourself to be. You want to be able to be your true self in all these dynamic situations that keep changing. It also includes treating people with respect and having a good self-respect. You have to know who you are, and you have to respect yourself before you can learn to respect others. Social health also includes setting boundaries. Knowing, setting boundaries in your various relationships, and not all relationships are the same. So boundaries and relationships will change depending on the relationship that you have. Their friendships, their spousal relationships, there's parental children relationships. So all those those interactions will have different kinds of boundaries. And key to being socially healthy is also having a support network of family and friends, and learning how to have fun in life, and realize that life is meant to be lived, and there is a way that you can position yourself to balance your various activities, balance your relationships, and still have fun and be cool. So I'll pause at that for the time being.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to like the whole concept of a sound mind in a sound body. Pastor Henry has a video lined up for us. And once that video is finished, we want to go into a little bit more about mental health, but how we recap physical health. I think you'll find this video very interesting.
I am 97 years old. They call me the fittest pensioner on the planet. I was 95 when I took up sprinting, and I now have 2 Masters World Records. I'm still competing, traveling around the world. Competition makes you train more, and you get an adrenaline rush, which is extremely important for your health. I was a dentist until I was 75, but I've never really stopped working. Doing nothing is a curse. It's a death sentence. At the age of 87, in spite of the fact that I was rowing 6 days a week, I saw that my body had begun to deteriorate. And because I am extremely vain, I decided that I needed to change my body. It is essential that one has muscle. Society has stamped us with an expiry date. This is ridiculous. I want to start a revolution. We recycle everything else. We should recycle ourselves. Anybody can do this. I am not chasing youth. Old age is one of the most wonderful, stupendous parts of one's life. Life is a wonderful gift, and it's never over until it's over.
Fantastic. So I want to open up the discussion to all 3 panelists, right? Because I think he kind of sums up the mind-body relationship and, you know, the whole question of how athletes assert themselves and self-care and how you speak mentally. I want to acknowledge Joanne Matlin, who's also one of our panelists. She has just joined us from another meeting. Sister Joanne, welcome. So to the panelists, he said, doing nothing is a curse, a death sentence. He's not changing youth. My question to you, do we have an expiry date? And can you tell me about his mentality? Obviously, his physicality is way more than some of us expect. But what of movement and that mind-body relationship? Do we really have an expiry date? Or is that something society has given us? And how can we shift our mentality to live a bit more like he does? Antonio, I'm going to come to you first.
Can't hear.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. All right, so if we have an expiry date, to tell the honest truth, our bodies, as they get older, they start to break down. That is the natural course of life. As he said, it happens, right? But we have a finite amount of years. That is just
Is he still there?
He's having some problem with his internet. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was me who fixed. Okay, so I'm going to come to Natalie then while we wait for Antonio and ask Natalie. Natalie, yes, we have a finite amount of years, but society has given us an expiry date, yes or no? And what role do you think nutrition has played in his 97 very active years?
What I would say is everybody has an expiry date. However, I think it's one of the things to take from the video that I think is very important is to make sure that your life is full. And one of the ways that you can increase that fullness or that feeling of fullness in your life is actually to be active. You'd find that if you increase your activity, and I'll speak to nutrition after I mention the activity factor, is that he's relishing his involvement in life through his activity and making sure that he's participating and participating fully in all that he's doing. So that he would say that he's a dentist and he participated fully in that. And he needed something else to make sure that the latter part of his life was full as well. And because of his competitive nature and, as he said, his vanity, being involved in sport worked for him. But I would say that it's important that as you get older, that you have lots of outlets to keep your life full and to find assets to enjoy. And those things help not only to prolong life, I would say, but to prolong the quality of life.
Quality.
And the idea of quality of life becomes even more important no matter what age you are, because those are the things that are going to bring you joy and satisfaction. To speak to the nutrition element, I mean, he didn't comment much on that, but what I would say is that, nutrition is going to contribute fully and it add to that fullness and enjoyment and basically allow him to participate even more fully and to engage and to enjoy his life.
Seneca and Sister Joanne.
Yeah, I agree with what Dr. Eargard said. There's a thing called apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. So surely everybody has a finite number of years. Some people's years run out faster than others. I always say to people, the death rate, as far as I know, is still 100%. You come into this world, you're going to go out at some point. But I think the point that this gentleman drives home is experiencing life to the full. And some people age gracefully, meaning that they don't assume an attitude and a stance of being old. They maintain, their physical health as best they can. And I'm sure Dr. Eargard will address this: proper nutrition, daily exercise. But your mindset has a lot to do with your sense of well-being and with your sense of aging. There's some people like this this dentist, as he said, he's not chasing youth, but he is maintaining his health as best as it can be maintained for his age. I'm sure he runs marathons and all that, but he will not be running a marathon like a 24-year-old sprinter. He will run at his pace and he will run in his age group. So, and I do agree with him that doing nothing is one of the fastest ways to age and to die. Because as you do nothing, your mind just, how do I want to say it? It's like it degenerates. And you will find that people who age well into their 90s and so on, they will tell you a part of their regimen is like keeping abreast of the news, reading widely, having very good interactions with family members and with friends. And you will notice that people too, as they age and their contemporaries begin to die out, that affects them and puts them, in that certain mental set of degeneration as well. So a lot has to do with your mindset and what you determine to be. I think that I always say, if you don't plan well for retirement. A lot of people who retire, they expire soon after they retire. You know, I've seen so many incidences of people working hard, amassing wealth, building their homes. A lot of people, Barbadians, would go overseas, work hard, build their homes back in Barbados, and everything is focused on when I retire. When I retire, I will travel. When I retire, I will do this and that and the fourth. And then they come home and they don't get a long time to enjoy those houses that they've built. And a lot has to do with, you know, their mental set. They've just put everything into retirement, and they haven't planned their life well and lived their life to the fullest. So they soon expire. So that's my take on that.
I think we lost Dr. Neff. So go ahead, please, Sister Joan.
Well, first of all, you know, as everyone was speaking, and even with that question as to if we have an expiration date, I think of the verse of scripture, what says it's appointed unto man once to die. Mm-hmm. And so you have a time of birth and you have a time of death. And really none of us may know that, even if a doctor tells you you have X amount of time to live, it's still God's timing. So while we live at every stage of our life, it is important for us to have both healthy and quality relationships and have the best quality of life possible at every stage of our life. So when we talk about social health and how it's linked to our mental health, definitely it's a mindset, even around aging. I think of my mom, who is, hopefully she doesn't mind me saying this, into her 80s, and she loves to interact with the younger ones, with her grandchildren, and just keep involved and engaged with life. With regards to retiring, you know, we can retire from a career and a field of work, but we should really not retire from life. And so as we continue to engage in life, we would see the benefits to our overall social health, our overall mental health, as we continue to engage with life and engage in those healthy and quality activities and relationships. Social isolation can be a precursor. It can trigger some mental health concerns, whereas social interaction, research has shown, has great benefits. So definitely, despite our age and throughout every stage of life, it's important for us to maintain those quality relationships.
Antonio, are you back with us?
Yes, I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I would just add on to the tail end of what everyone said. Yes, we do have those final years, but what we are really trying to accomplish is maintaining a quality of life that is legible for us. We want to make sure that we are moving. We want to make sure that we are always keeping not just
I think he got stuck again. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Holding years, that our health does not deteriorate too fast. So as Sister Joan would have said, that we, the doctors and everyone, they can't give us a number on our years. So the best thing that we can do is just try to live and try to make sure that we continue exercising and continue nurturing our social relationships as we continue to age, just to make sure that our quality of life, that we maintain a high quality of life, I should say.
Okay. Thank you, Antonio. So one of the things that was highlighted in the mental health program is that mental health is more than just the absence of a mental illness.
Mhm.
And sometimes mental illness itself is triggered by traumatic events. So I have two questions. Why is it that we can cope with some stress, but not others? And two, is there evidence to suggest that mental health care and physical health care can reduce a person's predisposition to mental illness? So
I don't know if you want me to jump in on that one first.
Mhm.
Basically, from my perspective, if you are going to achieve balance, which is the way that the human being works best, then your physical health is actually going to make your mental health better, and your mental health is better if you're physically active. So that is the symbiosis between those two things that is going to improve your quality of life. And if you have the ability to exercise, you will notice that in certain stressful situations, you have more access to your coping mechanisms, and you can actually draw from those in order to deal with whatever challenge you have in that specific time. So what I would say is, if you can think of yourself in a stressful situation, if you have more stressors than you feel you can cope with, then the outcome of that situation is usually a deleterious one. However, if you've exercised, or if you've had a breathing, even a calming exercise that you do before you have to tackle a stressful situation, that reflection time, that gap, that release can help you to be able to use those coping mechanisms in that moment to deal with things better. So that what I would say is that your physicality, the way you exercise, the endorphins that you release, all of those benefits that you get from exercise or being physical, definitely will help you if you have challenges. And we all have challenges every day. So if you're dealing with more challenges than normal, or different challenges, or things that you find particularly difficult, then physical activity is going to be an asset for you in those situations.
And I think also one of the coping mechanisms that helps a lot of people is what I would call our spirituality. And I think that Bible text comes to my mind of casting all your care upon God because he cares for you. So, having regular devotional time where you come apart and you draw on strength from a higher being than yourself is also a wonderful coping mechanism. Prayer and meditation helps us to cope with many stressful situations. As a practicing Christian myself, I often wonder how people who don't have that dynamic in their lives, how are they able to cope with all the stresses that this world throws at us from time to time? So I would, like to recommend that if people don't have that particular aspect of their life ongoing, that they, start and try to develop that relationship where you meditate and you pray, because that takes away a lot of the stress. And secondly, building good relationships, having that, friends and family that you can turn to and talk with about situations that develop is also another way of coping and safeguarding one's mental health. I think people who succumb to the stresses of life are those that you will find that often they're loners. They don't think that they have meaningful connections that can help them to get through some of their stressful situations. And of course, resting well. Our bodies are wonderful machines, but like all machines, they will wear out faster if they are not rested at for appropriate periods of time.
Sister John, I want to come to you. How do we normalize mental health in today's society? So I've experienced a traumatic event and I need to speak to someone, but I'm afraid to say that to my friends or my family for fear of being labeled crazy. And I know I'm not necessarily presenting symptoms of a mental illness. How do you think we can normalize mental health in today's society?
Well, I think there is much more awareness around mental, well-being now, and I think much more so than in years gone by. There is certainly a lot of stigma around it in some environments still, but I think it goes back again to maintaining those relationships and having a trusted someone that we can talk to and share our concerns with, who is able to guide us, into getting the help we need. I think we have to continue to message that it's a medical condition. And as you would go and speak to your doctor about any other feeling or any imbalance in your body, then it's the same way that we need to view our mental well-being. So I think even within the church environment, we have to talk about it more and not make it such a stigma or a hush-hush. So we normalize that conversation in our homes, in our churches, in our communities. In the schools, there's a lot of discussion around it. There's a focus on the youth, as we know, especially adolescents. There's a focus on that and their mental well-being as well. So I think we need to continue that conversation. And even within our homes as parents, we need to have those regular check-ins with our children from very young, because we recognize that from very young, children can also have issues with their mental well-being. So if we have those conversations and make them part of our discussions, even as you check in about their health and their well-being, and if they're being physical enough, if they're active enough, then it would become a normal process for us to have those discussions and for others to seek the help that they need.
Okay, Antonio, I want to come back to you. We have a question. Is walking the best way to start getting into exercise?
All right. If walking is the best way to start getting into exercise, walking is the most accessible for most persons, unless you yourself are incapable of walking, unless you have a disability, but it is the most accessible way for persons to get into exercise. But I would always say, find the most enjoyable thing for you. You can try yoga. You can try Tai Chi, which is a nice, calm, and easy move into exercise also. If you are a swimmer, or if you used to swim before, try swimming. If you used to run, you can try jogging. But the best thing for a person to do, or an individual to do, is to just start with a mode of exercise that they are comfortable with, that they can continue with in the long run. For me, I don't like walking for a long period of time, or I don't like jogging for a long period of time. So I wouldn't start walking if I wanted to get back into exercise. I like being in the gym, and I like exercising hard because that challenges me mentally. So then we're going to look at the same thing we were talking about, keeping our mental acuity and our physical bodies connected. I need to stimulate my mind in the exercise that I decide to start with. So that is what I am going to start with. So the best thing is always start with something that is going to keep you engaged and that you can sustain over a longer period of time.
Okay, and so I start in the gym and I want to have all these protein shakes and these smoothies and these coffee drinks. Dr. Roberts, how healthy are coffee drinks and smoothies and supplements part of a good diet?
Okay, so the challenge with most drinks is that they usually will have in a high amount of sugar. So whether you're dealing with coffee drinks or mixed drinks or smoothies or juice, the problem that comes along with them most of the time is that they're going to have in too much sugar. So for somebody who's looking at improving their health, I would say to them, water is your friend. The more water that you can take in, the better you would usually be. If you can eliminate some of those sugary drinks, then it will actually improve your health. And for some people, they think, well, I don't have diabetes, or I don't have this, or I don't have that. But it doesn't matter if we're just looking at your health generally and we want to do something to improve it. Then changing from high sugar intake to a lower sugar intake by just eliminating some of those drinks would definitely benefit you. So if you're at the beginning of your exercise journey, or that you're now thinking about restarting, that's not the time to reintroduce a lot of sugar, because it means that you're just exercising away what you're taking in instead of actually benefiting overall. So that's what I would say in terms of the sugary drinks. No need to go there if you don't have to.
Great. So while you're on the topic of sugar and drinks, let's go a bit more into nutrition. Can you tell me what constitutes a healthy diet, or what a healthy plate of food looks like when they start eating? I know there's a certain strength and conditioning coach here who encourages people to eat when they're exercising. And I'm like, eat and exercise? No, they don't go together. Clarify that myth for us, please.
Oh, okay. So your body is a machine, a very sophisticated machine. In order for you to achieve your goals, you do have to eat. It's just a matter of what you eat, how you eat, and the frequency with which you eat. So that what I would say to most of my clients, or to anybody who asks me about a healthy plate, if you were to take the plate that you ate your lunch from, or you ate dinner from, and you split it in half of that should be vegetables. Mm-hmm. So we should be looking at nice, colorful things on that side of your plate. Should look nice and pretty. In the Caribbean environment, a lot of the time, we don't do that half of the plate. Or if we do it, it doesn't look too pretty. But what you want over there is you want color, you want fiber, you want your antioxidants. That's what the part of your plate that's giving you a lot of your nutritional value. The other half of the plate, if you split it in two, should be focused, one quarter should be focused on protein, and the other quarter should be focused on whole grains. Whole grains is where you're looking at non-processed starches. So you would rather brown rice than white rice, or you'd rather brown bread than white bread, that kind of focus. Again, so when you put the whole plate together, even if you have chronic disease, you should be amenable to fueling yourself for the exercise that you want to do, or fueling yourself to get through the day. The idea you mentioned in terms of frequent meals and making sure you fuel yourself well is that if you're actually taking in a plate that looks like that, it's not necessarily going to be high calorie, but it's going to be of high nutritional content. So when you have frequent meals that look like that in terms of makeup, it's not as if you're taking in a large amount of calories, or you're taking in an unbalanced amount of calories. It's actually going to be very effectively and efficiently fueling what you need to do during the course of a day. So if you think of that plate, and then you think of the glass of water that goes along with it, that's like a real good combination there.
The glass of water, not juice. My big cup of Mobi as a Caribbean person. We have a question in the chat. Well, Antonio, I want to ask if you have anything to add to what Dr. Roberts just said, and then we'll take some of the questions in the chat.
I lost my internet connection. I heard it. Is it me that's stuck, or everyone else?
You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't hear the question. I'm not hearing you. I didn't hear the question.
I was asking if you wanted to add to what Dr. Roberts said.
Okay. At this present moment, I would just like the persons to stop trying to we have the myths about protein intake and the excess, what they call it now, I'm not one who believes in all these supplements, because I think that we can get everything that we need, or most of what we need, from what we eat. The only problem is that because of our particular diets, we might need to supplement. In that case, I would say to persons, if you are going to start an exercise program, and if you are on a particular diet, just let your doctor know or your trainer know what that particular diet contains, because they need to model your exercise around what you eat also. Sometimes, I say something, but most of the times we have to change what the client eats. That is majority of the time, 99% of the time, we have to change what the client eats. But it is always striking a balance with each individual and making sure that they can always sustain. And I'm going to hear me talking about this continuously throughout the rest of the chat, that we need sustainability all the time. Whatever we do, we need to find that level where we can sustain what we are doing. You don't want to cut out, as Natalie was saying, Dr. Roberts was saying, that you don't want to cut out your, say you don't want to cut out all your carbohydrates, you don't want to cut out everything, and then after 3-4 weeks you start back to eat everything, and then this happens, you blow back up. And eating what you can manage and sustain throughout your lifetime. All right, nothing else I can add on to that.
Fantastic. So we have a question. Are there health benefits to fasting, particularly intermittent fasting? And I want to ask Dr. Roberts to address it, but I also want to ask Seneca or Sister Joanne to speak about fasting and mental well-being, and fasting and spiritual well-being. So we're going to just introduce the mind-body relationship and how they work. So Dr. Roberts, Antonio, we see a lot of keto diets and high-fat diets, etc. What about fasting or intermittent fasting as it relates to nutrition and exercise?
Okay, so I will tackle that by saying it's going to be a very individual answer. For some people, intermittent fasting is not going to be very far from what they inherently want to or what they inherently do. And as long as their interval for eating, I would say, is not smaller than 8 hours, and they can still fit in balanced meals, for those persons, I would say they can achieve balance and health. If the interval for fasting is too long, or the interval for eating is too short, then you kind of trigger behaviors that are not necessarily going to be beneficial or sustainable. What do I mean by that? They're not going to be beneficial in terms of you're actually starting them on a binge fast cycle. So what you're trying to encourage them to do is to eat a whole lot in that short period of time, and then have a very long period of time when they're not eating. Your body does not work normally, or your circadian rhythms do not adjust very well to having that type of cycle, so that the body does not respond very well if you're going to be fasting for an extended period of time. This is not talking about short fasting periods, but this is talking about doing this for months, to having your circadian rhythm disrupted in this way. So we have to look at it in terms of the length of time you want to achieve this fasting cycle and how long you want to continue fasting for. In terms of looking at intermittent fasting as a lifestyle, I would say that most people, after they've done intermittent fasting for a few days, a week, maybe 2, they're very challenged, and it's not something that they can see keeping up for the rest of their life. And what may happen is that they stop, and then they have a bout where they really are like, well, I'm going to eat every single thing, and I really will eat from morning till night. And that is what you want to avoid, because you don't want to have periods of excess and then periods of nothing. You want to create a balance where you have a healthy relationship with your food and you're able to balance what you do in a day.
Mhm. You
Can you?
want us to look at
Okay,
fasting
go ahead.
and mental health? Well,
Yes.
for many spiritual people, fasting is, a part of their practice. And some people fast when, especially if they have a very perplexing problem, complex problem, and they feel they need that really closeness with God, they do fast. But I think I would go with what Dr. Roberts said, that even with that practice of, fasting, praying and fasting, it should be done thoughtfully and not for very long periods of time. I know of some religious practices where people fast for days or weeks, and they go back to the Bible about where it says that Jesus fasted for 40 days in the wilderness. But I always say to people, that's Jesus. You are not he. And, he had a reason for that. I don't think that we should fast for that long a period of time, because it causes a lot of problems. And even with fasting, praying and fasting, I always suggest to people that they have some, whether it's orange juice or some drink, some maybe warm drink, or drink water periodically during the day fast or the morning fast or whatever, because you definitely don't want your body to be dehydrated. But it does bring some kind of, mental relief when people have perplexing problems and they seek that closeness with God.
I just wanted to touch a little bit on that in terms of the different types of fast that you can have. Right. I mean, we've touched on the fact that, you could have a water fast where you're not taking in anything at all. And then we're talking about ways that you can have juice fast, or you can have a Daniel fast, or all of those things offer degrees with which you can actually have a fast. With intermittent fasting, which we were talking about just now, it is really not so much that. It is somebody having their regular meals, but just kind of squashing them into 8 hours instead of squashing them into 12. Mm-hmm. But it's called a fast because you're not eating in the other 16 hours or whatever of the day. So I think in terms of fasting, we have to always look at what kind of fast someone wants to have and the duration of the fast, mm-hmm. and also what their physical demands are during that fasting period. Because what naturally tends to happen is if you're having a fast and you're actually significantly bringing down your calories, or you're bringing down what you take in, you tend to decrease your activity significantly during that period. And if that balance is created, then the body can compensate, especially if it's a short period of time that you're doing the fasting. So that if you're going to, fast for 2 days or 3 days, you can manage that from a physical point of view. And it can give you the mental and spiritual benefits that would have been mentioned.
Thank you, Dr. Roberts. We're going to stay there for a minute. We have a comment saying, I recently begun using my tea without sugar. Who can believe it? It's surprisingly great. He must have some really good tea. But there's a question. I read a book once which said our blood group should inform our diet. Can you shed any light on this? Unmute your mic, Dr. Roberts.
I was asking you to repeat the last part of what you said.
Sure. The person read a book, which said our blood group should inform our diet. Can you shed any light on that?
I assume the person is talking about eating for your blood type. And what I would say is that writer, or the research that went along with that book, has in long term, because it's a book probably written about 10 or 15 years ago. So it's been around for a while. And what they found over time is that there isn't much validity to eating for your type. In the book, they do reference lots of different types of diets or different proponents of or combinations of foods that you should have together. And when you look at each one of them in isolation, they are actual advocating some quite healthy programs or some quite healthy ways to eat. But the synergy between your specific blood type and the meal plan has not borne out in terms of credibility and research over time.
Thank you. So, mind-body relationship during COVID-19. Seneca, Sister Joanne, how does anxiety or stress, particularly with the pandemic, affect our mental health now? Or how does stress and anxiety generally affect our mental well-being, and how has that been exacerbated during COVID-19? And I'd like to perhaps ask that same question to Robert Antonio. How does stress and anxiety affect our physical health, and how is that, extended or exacerbated? So we can start with mental health, or
I can start with the physical health component if none of the mental
sure.
What I would say is that people will come to me with complaints of muscle pains or aches or spasms or losing concentration at work or things like that. And a lot of the time, if say COVID-19 has happened and we're all sitting down in front of computers for endless periods of time having meetings, and you find yourself having neck pain, back pain, all of those kinds of things. That's how your physical health can be impacted, I would say, by a more sedentary lifestyle, by changing a lifestyle where you're in front of a computer, for more parts of the day than at your desk or walking up and down or, interacting in your office. So you can have physical signs of stress or anxiety in that way, in that you're having muscle spasms or you're having more aches and pains and that kind of thing. To combat those things, is the same. You can use the same modality in terms of you are sitting down or you are in your meetings for longer. How about getting up in between, or having a interval of time in which you say, well, I have to get up and stretch, or you're going to be home for more periods of time, or there's these intervals that we can all go to the beach and walk or whatever. But using the same exercise regimes or stretching or yoga or some exercise modality to not only improve your posture, to improve how you're actually interacting with the computer, but also to decrease your anxiety and stress around those things that have to do, that are new, that are different, and so on.
And from an educational point of view, what many educators have learned to do is to build in self-care time in their lessons. So like for me, every day, I have a self-care exercise for the students to do. And sometimes it requires them to go outside, take 15 minutes outside, go for a walk. And I link it to biology because that's what I teach. So I would say to them, go take a 15-minute walk and increase your walk or run, or sometimes just go, recently when it was snowing, go out and play in the snow for 15 minutes. But before you start, take your pulse rate or count the number of breaths you take in a minute. And then immediately after the exercise, tell me, take a count again, because I want them to see the relationship between the increased activity, the impact that it has on the circulatory system and so on. So then they come back and they would tell me, I breathed so many breaths when I was at rest, but now I, was breathing much faster. And of course, I would ask them, why do you think that is happening? Because I want them to relate it to the fact that they are burning energy, and the body has to get that oxygen in at a sufficiently good rate to burn the energy. So there's so many ways that, I can get them to apply the biology that they're learning to self-care. But I do make sure that every day they have some way to self-care, and that we check in with them about what they're doing to take care of themselves, because we know that it is mentally taxing for them to sit at the computer for long periods of time. We've also divided up our lesson period. Instead of having them sit for an hour, we give shorter lesson spurts, and then have them change activity, and then come back and complete the lesson. So you learn how to break up the lesson so that students are not overstressed and overwhelmed by sitting at the computer, and developing what we call like the Zoom frenzy, or there are all different kinds of names that have been coined now for Zooming for long periods of time. So yes, and even with respect to state and national exams, some of those have been waived, and students are being evaluated in different ways, rather than having to go through the additional stress of trying to pass the MCAS or whatever it is, whatever the state test is. In Massachusetts, they have waived, and throughout the country, they have waived certain tests because you don't want to overstress the children. So education has responded to the COVID pandemic in some of those ways.
Okay. I would like to add. Let me apologize. My internet has been unstable, so I'm losing parts of the questions and it's freezing up. But anyway, let me apologize for that before I start. Right now, what is going on to everyone through the entire pandemic? We are experiencing chronic stress, basically. A lot of persons are experiencing chronic stress. When I say chronic stress, we are completely bombarded by a lot of different things, a lot of different stressors. We're worried about, we might be worried about our financial state. We might be worried about our jobs. We might be worried about our physical health, our social health, our relationships with our families and friends. We are not having all of these things anymore because of the pandemic. So really and truly, during this whole pandemic time, we are having a high surge of hormones in our body that can help increase the blood pressure and causing our hearts to beat faster and the vessels to narrow. Now, it's essentially there's no straight up proof that the long-term high blood pressure can actually lead to a risk of high blood pressure, if you understand what I'm saying. So there's no proof in itself that this long-term buildup, it can cause a long-term high blood pressure, but there are certain behaviors that are linked to helping us, or to say help that are linked to bringing the onset of high blood pressure, like drinking too much alcohol. We can end up drinking a lot of alcohol. Persons tend to consume more alcohol during times of feeling stressed, and they end up eating more unhealthy foods also, which can lead to certain health conditions. And then there's the whole idea of depression, as I said, from being isolated from your friends and family. So all of these things are something that we are being affected by during the COVID times. And things that we can do, as Dr. Roberts would have said, that just set an alarm every time to get up from the chair. If you're in front of the computer, as they were saying, zoom in all the time, set an alarm to get up from the chair and stretch and move. It's something simple as stretching. Use the video messaging platforms to encourage your friends to get active with you. Just remind each other to get up and move at a particular time of day so that it becomes a habit. And just form that habit within your network of friends. And eventually it becomes a daily routine. So small things like that. Also, what we can try to do, we go to the grocery store, carry more groceries at once to try to help facilitate the muscular demand on your body. Certain things like those. Walk farther from the car, change around the furniture in the house is another thing that you can do also, just to help use your muscles a little bit more. You don't have to change your whole house, Sasha. Dr. Southern, but just move around the chair, see what the living room needs to look like, or you want to change that around, change around the bedroom another day. These things can help you to get active throughout the day. All right. I don't know if there was something else you had to ask. Is that it? I covered, or
yeah, you.
That's it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
If I start moving one thing in the house, I am gonna want to change around the entire house, just so you know.
A little birdie told me that already, so I
Sister Joanne, I want to come to you. I don't know if it's too much of a stretch, but it's been difficult for us as adults and even for the older generation to cope with COVID. Can you address perhaps adolescents and young children and what you've seen in practice, and what are some of the coping mechanisms that you could give to parents to address their challenges with having Zoom on TV and not being able to go outside and play with their friends and just run around and be kids? This is almost a year. We feel like we're going crazy. How are they dealing with it, and what advice would you give to parents?
Well, I think, children are part of a family system, right? And they are also stuck in the house, for want of a better word, with parents where they don't have the usual social interactions that they would have had pre-COVID, especially for our school-age children, or even those who may be in a daycare or a childcare facility. So they have now lost that interaction with maybe even same-age peers. They may be part of a family system where they may be the youngest, the older ones really, doesn't have much in common with them. So they have lost some stuff during COVID. And that's why as parents, we have to be very aware, even of our young children, how this pandemic and that social isolation has impacted them, and how it has impacted their ability to develop even those social skills that we normally would teach children as they interact with peers, like sharing and being loving and kind. Those peer-to-peer relationships. So I would say that, we as parents of young children, we have to be aware of that. Sometimes we think that children don't have the stress of the bills, or I'm feeding them, they have somewhere to sleep, they have a roof over their head. So, why do they need to worry? But I think we need to be mindful that they are within that stressful environment. They listen, they absorb what we say. They observe our behaviors, right? And they take on sometimes, even to the extent of blaming themselves or taking ownership of some of the problems in their families. So they may decide, I'm going to be quiet because mom is already stressed, or I'm going to be quiet and not play because daddy's already, he comes home and he's in a bad mood. So let me keep quiet because I may be the one to cause him to respond negatively. So as parents, we have to be mindful that the environment we create even in our homes, and especially since families have had to be, within the confines of the home during COVID, we have to make sure that that environment is one where children can also have opportunity to express themselves, opportunity for play. You may not be able to go to the mall or go to the park, but you may have a backyard, get them out there, do some activity, as Antonio was sharing, keep them involved physically as well, so they too have an outlet for some of their pent-up feelings and emotions. And similarly with adolescents, again, doing those check-ins with them, monitoring their online activity, trying to still have them engage with their peers in ways that are appropriate within the COVID environment, and certainly trying as best as we can to give other alternatives other than screen time, because they're on Zoom for school, plus, their online presence. We need to make sure that they have time where they can also separate from that and engage in other activities so that they can really feed their mind, soul, and body.
Thank you. And to some degree, all of the panelists have alluded to this concept of self-care. Definitely, Dr. Robert Seneca, you've actually used the phrase. So I want to come to sleep and self-care. We're moving forward. We recognize that we're in a pandemic. We recognize that, yes, my physical health does impact my mental health and vice versa. And I want to start making a change towards having that healthy balance. What exactly is self-care? What does it really mean? And what is the importance of mental and physical well-being? This question is for all panelists.
Okay, so I can start. Self-care basically is putting some focus in a society or in a world where it is driven by serving others, for the most part. Self-care is remembering that in order for you to actually serve others well, you have to have some connection to self. And self-care can be seen by some, I suppose, as a selfish act. But really and truly, the way that I think about self-care, and I think the idea behind self-care, is that you can't pour from an empty cup. So that if you actually are going to be effective at what you do and actually perform in the best way that you can to serve others, then really and truly, you have to pour into yourself first. In this way, self-care is a relationship with self that is physical as well as mental. So that for some people, you kind of advise or you can advocate to combine the two. What do I mean by that? So on a morning, I will say to some of my patients, if you get up first thing in the morning and you do your devotions, for example, you might decide that you're going to actually do your devotions and read something. And I would say, well, why not follow it on with things like taking a walk? So that you've actually combined something that is a mental exercise or a spiritual exercise with something that's physical as well. And you've reaped the benefits of both of those things simultaneously. And if you can continue to do that in a sustainable way or a consistent way, you've actually prioritized self in a way that throughout the rest of your day, you can actually serve others better. In terms of self-care, otherwise, I think throughout the day, you need to have check-ins and be very aware with how you are responding to situations, how if you need to take time or a breath for yourself. So that in the classroom, it might mean that you give more breaks. But for an adult who has to kind of manage things themselves, it means that you need to pause for a moment and do a check-in and make sure that, in this moment, how am I coping? How am I able to deal with this? Do I need a break? The meeting that I've been in for the last 6 hours, am I able to contribute fully to this, or am I tired? What did I sleep? Did I make sure that there was a cutoff time for the phone or social media or something? So that inherently in self-care, it's basically checking in with self intermittently during the day to make sure that you are aware of how you are and the things you need to do to improve your quality of life. And then the act of self-care is actually prioritizing things that are going to improve your mental well-being as well as your physical well-being, and thus make sure that the synergy between the two is working for your benefit.
And I'd like to add that self-care is not just for this period of pandemic. Self-care is something that you need to do 365 days a year. because as the doctor said, if you are not in good health, it is impossible for you to serve others well. So it is important to take good care of oneself. And setting boundaries is a very important part of self-care. And I know especially in the Caribbean context, we don't like to say no to friends and families when they ask of us certain things. But there is absolutely nothing wrong. And as a matter of fact, it is an important part of self-care to be able to say no sometimes, or I can do this for you, but I can't do it right now. I can attend to this tomorrow and give the person a time or some alternative date. But it is very important to take care of oneself and to set those clear boundaries. And eating well, eating a balanced meal or balanced meals, however many times a day you eat, knowing when, if it is lunchtime, it is lunchtime. You set that boundary very clearly. I have to eat at this point in time. I know it's easier said than done because I myself fall into the rut of, okay, I need to do this before I eat, and I have all these different things to do before I can do certain things to self-care. But I just want to emphasize that taking care of oneself is not just for the pandemic. Taking care of oneself should be a daily part of our routine.
I think to add to what Seneca said about self-care is really being kind to yourself and not being as hard on yourself, because sometimes we are hard on our own selves than others are. So, be very mindful of yourself, be conscious of your environment, be present, show up for your own self, not just for others. And certainly, as Dr. Roberts said, do those check-ins. I would like to add that also caring for others should be part or can be part of our self-care regimen. It doesn't mean that you overdo it or you do it to your own detriment, but I believe that we should also be caring for others. There are great health benefits to doing good and being kind to others as well. It's as we volunteer, as we help others, it makes us feel good just to give or to give back. There has been some health benefits that have been noted around that. Lower stress, helps lower blood pressure, helps with pain, because you are now not so focused on what you are going through, but you're assisting others. So I would encourage that, we continue to also see not only caring for ourselves, but also caring for others in a balanced way and with good boundaries as also part of our own self-care.
Okay, great. I would like to add also that, for one, I would definitely love to see persons start caring for themselves 365. As it was said, it might seem like a selfish outlook, but it definitely is not. You can't help fill up another cup with an empty glass. Okay, you need to have something in your glass first before you can help someone else, before you can help fill their glass. Um, and I would like to take a inner look and use myself and as an example, and I would like to also help put this out there for the side of men also. Okay, um, for us men, we tend to be seen, or we see ourselves as the caregiver, we see ourselves as the provider. And we tend to take up the role of making sure that everyone is good within the home. And we forget about ourselves. And I would like that any of the men out there that are listening, take time for yourself. I do have a support system around me. Luckily, my wife, my mother, and a bunch of ladies, I should say, that would say, Antonio, you need to take a break, you need to slow it down, take some time for yourself, and then get back on the horse and go again. Right? That is just the course of my work. I tend to make sure that persons are doing well and in the physical aspect. So I'm always making sure that they have the best course in their physical activity. Um, so what I will, as I was like to add, I'm just adding on to the tailing of everyone. You know, just take that time to sit back, turn off your phone, go for a nice leisurely walk because it goes into physical activity also. But you just take time for you. It is nothing wrong with it because at the end of the day, you're gonna break you're gonna break your body down, you're gonna break your mental state down, and then you have nothing else to give to anyone. So you definitely need to take that time because it does help in the long run for your physical and your mental health.
Thank you. There was a question in the chat, but I think you guys just addressed it. The comment is that the problem of the average person is that they don't create balance in what they do. And the suggestion is that you plan around your values, you draw circles. And so you are in the inner circle. So when we talk about self-care, then next are your relationships and then work. And when I say you, I'm just meaning like the physical, obviously for us, you know, God is at the center of everything that we do. Question was, what do you think? But I think you very aptly answered that question without actually seeing it. There's another question for Dr. Roberts and Sister Joanne. Does an individual's socioeconomic status affect their physical and or mental health? But any panelist can answer.
Right, so I guess I can start. Your socioeconomic status can affect your mental or your physical health, but I would say that no matter your socioeconomic status, you can actually improve your mental or physical health if you so desire. So we would have touched on something like walking. If really and truly you don't have the socioeconomic outlet there to go to the gym or to spend a lot of money investing in exercise, for example, there are things that you can do quite freely so that you do have options. I would say that the socio part of it, or the actual cultural part of why we don't prioritize ourselves, our health, our mental state, our physical state, is a more complex aspect of that question rather than, okay, are there free ways to exercise? So what I would say is that your focus a lot of the time or the question I ask people, are you living to work or are you working to live? And a lot of the time, people will say to me, well, you know, I think I should, but then I have to ask them again, are you living to work or are you working to live? And when you actually get the right breakdown of what they're actually, or where they're coming from, people will change their perspectives and will look at quality of life issues or aspects and decide, okay, well, here I have to prioritize self in this way. And that might be actually taking the 15, 20, half an hour time to walk, because that's going to benefit me from a mental perspective or a physical perspective. So I would say, to answer your question, do socioeconomic factors impact your health? They can, but socioeconomic factors can also improve your health. So a lot of the time it has to do with your priorities. And if you can actually think of solutions to the same things that are going to that may be causing restriction at that point in time. So the socioeconomic factors aren't changing, but the way that you're dealing with them or the way that you're actually finding solutions might be a little different.
Another way that socioeconomic factors impact one's health, mental and physical. And this is particularly more so, I guess, in large countries like the United States, for example. You will find that there's a way that politics and boundaries interplay, so that it's a known thing in the United States that some people live in what we call food deserts, in that their socioeconomic status marginalizes them to live in certain communities. And in those certain communities, they don't have as much accessibility to a diversity of foods. So they're very limited in their food choices. It is not uncommon to find in some of those, neighborhoods, you will find large pharmacies and supermarkets, and what you see when you walk in immediately, you will find a similar kind of supermarket in another area. But when you walk into the two different supermarkets, you see completely different offerings for food and for other aspects of one's care. So that the poorer neighborhoods, the grocery stores are always promoting more bad health through the choices that they offer people, the empty carbohydrates that they offer, the big pep drinks, the big bags of chips and stuff like that, the fast foods, the fast fried foods and unhealthy foods. Those are more accessible to people in those neighborhoods. So government has to make a decisive effort, and educators and policymakers and so on have to make calculated efforts to improve the accessibility to good food and good health care in those neighborhoods where people are marginalized because of their poor socioeconomic status. Fortunately, I think in the Caribbean, it is not as bad. But definitely in large countries, that is something that people have to grapple with. And you constantly have to, be determined. Like as an educator, I always try to teach my students about making healthy food choices. And as Dr. Roberts said, accessing the free exercise activities that may be abundant, in terms like go to the park and walk, go to the park and play a ball. You don't have to have, access to the gym to go to the Y and, do your workouts, form groups that will help you exercise and healthcare. So definitely socioeconomic status in some countries will impact one's mental health as well as one's physical health.
To add to that, I would just like to say that if we think back a couple of generations, and we look at the things that generation used to eat and the type of activity that they used to indulge in, what you would notice is that it wasn't necessarily more expensive, but it was prioritized in a different way.
Correct.
So that if we look at more whole foods and look at the things that you can have in your garden outside, that's not necessarily going to be any more expensive than or cause you any greater cost, but the quality of food that you're going to get in that way is going to be much better. So I think that just to add to what you're saying, I'm in total agreement with what you're saying before, is that you need to prioritize and educate. And I think the education is going to be something that it needs to continue and needs to be done, you know, as much as possible in as many forums as possible to let people know that it's prioritizing. It may take a little bit more effort to go and plant something in your backyard and make sure that it grows into something. But at the end of the day, you're providing yourself with a much better source of nutrition. And you know what you said about whether you think about it as active play or just more activity. You know, if you think a couple generations ago, people used to walk so much more than they do now.
Correct.
You know, and it's just prioritizing those things again and making sure that people understand that it's not necessarily a radical change in lifestyle. It's just prioritizing things that are going to keep you healthy.
Thank you so much. So we are at 8:57 already. Interesting conversation. So really quickly, COVID restrictions are being lifted in some countries. What are your hopes and or expectations as we not necessarily go back to normal, we're moving forward? What are your hopes and or expectations with regard to mental health or physical health?
Well, I would say that.
I think, first of all.
Okay, go ahead, Joanne.
Oh, well, first of all, I hope that we continue to practice the social distancing and the wearing of masks, because there's still some unknowns, even though many are being vaccinated. I think that we definitely have to be very mindful about our environment, about who we interact with, and our behaviors as we resume, hopefully, some sense of normalcy, because it will be different. And so we have to be aware of that. There's some who have lived in isolation for a very long time for various reasons. And so they have to relearn some behaviors. So again, we have to have some grace with each other. We saw during the pandemic where persons became very rude, very anxious. There was a number of different behaviors that were exhibited during that time. So even as we integrate again, and even in going back to our places of worship and those who may have to go back to the physical locations of their jobs, we have to be really mindful as far as how we take care of ourselves, how we remain present within our own self to do those check-ins that we would need to have consistently, and be mindful of our environment and for others around us. I don't think that we can let up as far as being attentive to our mental well-being. COVID isn't over. So I think we have to make sure that we retain that sense of self and presence, even as we go back into some sense of normalcy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, I would like to add that as we do open back up, I would like that the mentality towards movement and exercise remains the same. And I say this because before, while we were in the lockdown, we saw persons, or we heard persons complaining about the accessibility to exercise, the accessibility to the beach. This happened during the lockdown. Now, from my perspective, someone who is always looking at persons who are exercising, and persons who are always on the road or at the beach, I can say that I tend to see more of the population who try to exercise and who refuse to exercise. So I like the attitude that persons were going towards in terms of wanting to find that time to exercise. We got the 3 hours in the morning, and then they argued for the 3 hours in the evening, and we got the 3 hours in the evening, and then they wanted more time at the beach. And so I hope that we move forward with that mentality, because in Barbados, we are known as the amputee capital of the world. And if we can get more persons, if you can get more persons exercising and combating and using exercise to combat the NCDs that we have, if another situation happens like what we are currently experiencing, we would have an easier time at combating any virus that comes at us, right? It would just be, I just want to make sure, I just would like to see that persons continue this vigor in exercise or towards exercise.
For me, I hope the new normal will include a constant awareness of how to take care of one's health, eating properly, eating appropriately, as Dr. Roberts would have pointed out, making sure you have that balanced nutrition. And as Mr. Cheltenham said, having, that movement, continuing to exercise, and social distancing, I think, will be a little more relaxed, though, as people become vaccinated, as more of the countries we live in become vaccinated, because the CDC has reduced those restrictions so that vaccinated people can visit with each other, so that those relationships that were once in isolation, parents, grandchildren from their grandparents and so forth, you get more of those interactions. But like Joanne said, in all your interactions, remember that the virus is still there. And as a matter of fact, it keeps mutating, and you're getting more virulent strains of it as it mutates. And we are not sure yet if the vaccinations for the COVID-19 will stop the spread of the mutant strains. We don't know yet. So we need to still maintain social distancing to an extent, but not with the vast divide as before vaccinations came on the scene. The one thing, though, I tell people all the time is that there are two proven things that will keep any contagious or infectious agent at bay. That is proper hand sanitation and wearing your mask. So I would still caution that as you go out and about, you wear your mask and be sure to keep your hands clean. You go in and out, you use your bathroom, you do your cleaning in the home and whatever, sanitize your hands. Those two things have been the proven combatants against the spread of the COVID and of flu and anything else, the flu virus and other things. So good hand sanitation, wear your mask, keep an upbeat spirit, eat well, sleep well, keep your balance, and stay cool.
Thank you, everyone. We're gonna hand over to Pastor Griffith so that we can end our live broadcast. There are a few questions, so please feel free to stick around so we can address one of those. Pastor Griffith, over to you.
Yes, hello, good night. What another interesting session we have had. And I just can't tell you how I am obsessed with my beautiful little garden. My tomatoes are growing good, and it really have set me on a good mental frame. And I feel that I'm taking care of my health. So I want to thank all of you who participated this evening on behalf of Pastor Henry. I want to especially thank the panelists, Dr. Roberts, Sister Madeline, Brother Cheltenham, Sister King, of course, our host we normally have. We want to thank you very, very much for what has been happening. And I want to say to you quickly that it is all about building shatterproof families. And if you want to do that, we are recognizing that health is important. That's why we ran this program tonight again to emphasize teaching is important. But in addition to that, we recognize its legacy. What we pass on is so important. And as the doctor says, education. So we want to invite you all here next week. Next week, children or youth at Faith Tabernacle, they will be in charge of the program, and they would be in charge. They will be running the program, and they will be addressing the subject of the education system in the Caribbean. Maybe they will tell us how to educate, to exercise, how to educate, to make sure our legacy is well. So make the extra time. We're looking forward to see you next week, and God bless you. Same time, 7:30 next week. Many blessings. Over and out.